elections, despite the unfavorable climate for the party nationally and the eventual Republican gains. So allowing people to vote early shortens the lines. It makes voting more accessible, and Democratic-leaning voters have been taking advantage of early voting, particularly in the past couple of election cycles. It increases voter turnout, which, generally speaking, tends to help Democratic candidates. And so now, where Republicans control legislatures this year, particularly where they control legislatures and governorships, Republicans are rolling back early voting. They are cutting down the number of days. They are cutting down the number of hours. They are cutting down the number of locations. They are making it harder to vote, shortening the hours when you can vote, shortening the numbers of days when you can vote, making voting a more challenging thing to do because they think it might help the Republican nominee. They think it will make it less likely for President Obama to get reelected, structurally. Not on the substance, but on the means by which we vote for president. In Florida, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in Georgia, in Tennessee, in West Virginia, and the latest one now in North Carolina, Republicans in those state legislatures are restricting or trying to restrict early voting. And then there's newly registered voters. Newly registered voters went overwhelmingly for President Obama in 2008. He won newly registered voters in 2008 by 69 to 30% over John McCain, according to the exit polls. And so Republicans are changing election rules all over the country to make it essentially impossible to make even nonpartisan groups run voter registration drives. Particularly in Florida has been the vanguard of this. Groups like the Boy Scouts and the League of Women Voters walking away from the opportunity to do voter registration drives because it has become legally threatening to do so, thanks to the actions of the Republicans in the legislature and the Republican governor. And of course, 5 states have passed new laws this year requiring you to show photo ID at the polls. According to the Brennan Center, as many as 12% of eligible voters do not have a government-issued photo ID. That percentage is higher for groups like students. Young people voted for Barack Obama 66 to 37% over John McCain. Also, it includes minorities who voted in the 60s to the 90s over John McCain, and low-income voters who also came down for Obama over McCain in huge, huge margins. If 2012 plays out like 2008, and it is another blowout election, if Barack Obama wins hugely again in 2012, then of course none of these things will matter. But if it is close, any one of these things, let alone all of these things in combination, could very well matter. And after that election is over, no matter what happens in that election, these states have now structurally changed the way they conduct elections, the way democracy functions in these American states, so that the Republican Party has a partisan structural advantage in every election. What is the Democrats' answer to this? Joining us now is Melissa Harris Perry, MSNBC contributor, political science professor at Tulane University, and author of the new book, Sister Citizens, Shame, Stereotypes, and Black Women in America. Melissa, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Great to see. Whoa! I'm sorry. It was a goalpost moving. I didn't want to get hit by it.
Is it a goalpost moving, or is it a small d democracy being seen by Republicans as capital D democracy, as something that in itself benefits the Democratic Party and then therefore must be squelched?
Well, look, in a certain way, I just hate that I have to sit here as a progressive and say, no, we've got to keep the Electoral College just as it is. Because obviously reform of the Electoral College has been a standard progressive claim, right? The desire to move away from a system that actually buffers us from the popular vote choosing who the American president is, and that vastly overrepresents underpopulated states because of the way that the Electoral College votes are determined. 2 senators and 1 congressman in these states that have very, very small population. So on the one hand, having a conversation about the rules of the game is the best kind of democracy with a little d. But when we see it happening in this format, clearly, as you point out, not about ideology, not about a claim towards how democracy should work, but just about keeping this president from being reelected, basically buying 2012, election Aflac, kind of a secondary insurance to make sure if they can't beat the president on ideas, if they can't beat the president on the economy, then they will beat him on the rules of the game. That is absolutely a twisting of the purposes of American democracy.
Have you seen Democrats or progressive groups broadly taking this up as an issue that Republicans need to answer for? I realize that we have a more sometimes robust federal discussion in this country than we do a federalist discussion. And a lot of times state policies sort of go under the radar. But with abortion rights, with union rights, with voting rights this year, we've seen a really coordinated multi-state effort by Republicans all pushing in the same direction. Is there an effort, do you think, by Democrats and by progressives to make Republicans answer for that?
Not yet. I mean, this is part of sort of us getting very clear that 2010 was one of the most important elections of our lives, and in many ways we sat it out. That part of what 2010 did was not only to give a very powerful cohort within the Republican Party enormous control over the legislative direction of American politics at the federal level, but a huge portion of what 2010 did was to give these state houses, these state senates, and these governors' mansions to Republicans who would make choices that have long-term consequences, that aren't just about policies for their administration, but actually changing the rules of the game in a dramatic way, whether it's about the capacity for labor to organize, the ability for women to control their own reproductive capacity, or in this case, really for the meaning of the vote, what your vote cast in your state will mean in 2012. And we sort of missed that you can't just hand over a midterm in a decennial census year when people are redrawing districts and expect not to have exactly these kinds of rule changes. But no, this has not been, I appreciate the vigor with which you gave that early introduction, but the fact is talking about rule changes is not very exciting stuff for organizing politics on the ground.
Republicans have found it sufficiently organized to be in lockstep on this all over the country, but I feel like Democrats are sort of watching it happen at this point. Melissa Harris-Perry, MSNBC contributor, political science professor at Tulane University, and author of Sister Citizen, new book just out. Melissa, it's always great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rachel.
Academy Award-winning filmmaker Michael Moore will join us just ahead. Please stay with us.